way would be to do a Google search, Google Images search, for the words Moncef Marzouki cafeteria. What will pop up is a photograph of the Tunisian president tucking into a salad in the cafeteria of the United Nations in New York during the September 2014 General Assembly meetings. For somebody like me, who's used to seeing Arab leaders cloak themselves in the trappings of luxury, including, for example, having a red carpet rolled out for your Mercedes to drive on, seeing a Middle Eastern leader acting in so unassuming a fashion was nothing short of revolutionary. Another indication of the unusual nature of this individual was a decision that he took in April of 2014 to cut his salary as president by 2/3. Now, some cynics saw the move as merely symbolic. After all, it was about $9,000 a month that he deprived himself of. And, after all, what's $9,000 a month in the face of something like 16% unemployment? But again, in a political environment in which leaders have long extracted as much as possible from their people, this gesture, even if symbolic, was deeply symbolic, deeply meaningful. I've heard Dr. Marzoukי say, after all, that the role of a leader isn't to give orders, but it is to serve as an example. Today, the Arab world is sorely in need of such examples. As you all know, 6 years after the onset of the Arab Spring, only his country, and due in no small part, I think, to your efforts, only his country, Tunisia, has managed to achieve a semblance of the democracy for which the Arab people took to the streets throughout the Arab world in 2011. Today, we're lucky to have the former president of Tunisia share with us his reading of current events in the region and his prognosis for the future. I may also venture to say that the people of Tunisia are lucky to count individuals like himself among their countrymen. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Moncef Marzouki.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Massoud, for this generous introduction. I am really honored to be here, and I would like to thank the Kennedy School, the Middle East Initiative, Ambassador Nicola Burns, Professor Massoud, and Hilary Rintisi, and all of you for being here. I welcome the opportunity to address such an esteemed assembly and to share my thoughts about an issue as crucial and as dramatic as the current political change in the Arab world. But let me begin by something. Someone once asked the former Chinese Prime Minister Zhou Enlai, who died in 1976, what he thought of the French Revolution. And he replied, "It may be too early to make a final judgment." If a man as wise as Zhou Enlai believed that he had no right to pass judgment on a revolution that took place more than 2 centuries ago, how can I make any judgment or prediction on revolutions that are only 6 years old? One must remember how all of us, by us I mean the main political actors, have failed to predict the uprising and probably continue to partially misunderstand them. Until the very end, Ben Ali believed that he would stay immune to criticism and manage to tame the protests, and yet he had to escape the country on January 14th because of the protests. His supporter believed that the people could never challenge a strong and brutal police state, and yet the people succeeded in toppling a 23-year-old dictatorship. A few self-proclaimed moderates bet that the regime could be reformed from within, but the dictatorship never tolerated any meaningful reform and made no concession. The Islamists thought that the revolution to come would be Islamist, but it was secular and a democratic one. The jihadists believed that only an armed uprising could overthrow the regime, but protesters were nonviolent. Leftists worked hard in order to infiltrate unions and universities, thinking that workers and students would lead the revolution. But the uprising were led instead by unemployed graduates and people with no university degrees. Some people would argue that Tunisian Democrats were not wrong. Didn't they fight for democratic revolution? And wasn't this exactly what happened? True. But secular Democrats did not predict that the first free election would give the majority to the Islamists in 2011, or that the second election would bring back the ancien regime in 2014. As to Western government, despite all the data collected by their intelligence agencies and their powerful academic institution, they too have failed to predict the Arab Spring. I'm not going to exclude myself from the list. In 2006, I was convinced that the democratic revolution I had always dreamed of was very close. So I went to the Al Jazeera studio in Paris, where I was living in exile since 2011, and called the Tunisian youth to take the street and overthrow the regime. I announced in my speech that I would come back to participate in a peaceful revolution. And this is what I did. I returned to Tunisia expecting to be arrested at the airport, and this would probably trigger the protests. But I was not arrested. Nobody took to the street. Disappointed and a little bit upset, I returned to Paris after 2 months of harassment by the secret police. In 2010, I began to think that probably my life would end like my father's. He was an ally of Ben Youssef, an opponent to Bourguiba, and died in exile in Morocco in 1888. So you can imagine my surprise when I find myself on one day in December 2011 in the very office of the former despot after the National Constituent Assembly elected me. I had no idea that day of how daunting a task awaited me, one that would lead me to experience the deepest distress when I learned of the assassination of the two political leaders, Shokri Belaid and Mohammed Brahi, and of the assassination of so many of our soldiers and policemen by terrorists. And also, the deepest relief and joy when the Constitution was finally passed on January 27, 2014. When I try to understand why we were all wrong, I cannot find a single explanation, but a set of different reasons interacting in complex and subtle way. Islamists, leftists, or Democrats, we do need ideology, or at least conceptual framework, to interpret the world and to act accordingly. But these ideologies and frameworks can also be confusing and misleading. Ideologies, including the Democrat ideology, can function as distorting lenses and blind us from the reality. All of us indulged into wistful thinking, and all of us ignored the problem raised in 1972 by Lawrence, and were very relevant in politics. Does the flap of a butterfly's wing in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? How could we predict that an unknown young Tunisian setting himself on fire to protest against the harassment of the local police in a small rural town in Tunisia would lead to a revolution in Egypt and in a civil war in Libya and Yemen? So the first lesson, and probably the most important lesson from the Arab Spring, that one must be extremely careful and humble when analyzing current events and be wary of our own assumption and ideologies. Having said that, I believe in a number of ideas that I have drawn from 30 years experiences as a human rights activist and as head of state for 3 years. Allow me to begin with the countries where revolutions are said to have failed. How many times have I heard the most well-meaning people tell me, wouldn't have it been better for Syrians to keep quiet? What did the Libyans or the Yemenis gain from revolting, if not the destruction of their states and their societies? Why don't you admit that corruption is the price, a small price after all, so that people can enjoy peace? Isn't injustice preferable to civil war? My answer always is the same. Nobody takes to the street without a good reason. The corrupt elites pushed our youth to revolt, and they are the only responsible for the suffering of the people before the revolution happened, during the outburst, and now during the counter-revolutions. The Arab Revolution were caused essentially by the Arab dictators themselves. They are responsible for all the mess that preceded them and the chaos that followed them. In Syria, the people demonstrated for months peacefully, but instead of drawing the right lessons and starting reforms, the regime chose to push ahead, throwing its own country into a war waged against its own people that destroyed society and delivered the country to foreign occupation. It's striking to see that no leaders or supporter of the dictatorships have expressed regret, assumed responsibility, or apologized. All denied that they acted wrongly, and all used the chaos that followed the revolution as an excuse to justify the past. Journalists today and historians tomorrow will have a difficult task, identifying the individual, the state, and the methods used to abort nonviolent uprising and transform them in bloodbaths. I hope that some of the responsible for the violence in Syria, Yemen, and Libya will be brought to the International Criminal Court and made them accountable for their crimes. The Arab Revolution did not fail for internal reasons. The corrupt elites close to the overthrown ruler enjoy the support of foreign powers that help them restore their power. The individual and state behind the counter-revolution are wasting their money and their time. The course of history is not easy to stop or to reverse. Let me remember you that Russians lost their first round against their emperor in 1905, but won the second round in 1917. And the Romanov never regained their throne. Prior to them, the French, after the revolution in 1789, had to suffer throughout a whole century before building the first democratic republic in 1870. Our revolutions have not been able so far to free our countries from the corrupt elites, but these corrupt elites have not been able to restore totally the old system that has definitely died in people's hearts and minds. It's a long way to go before Arab countries will reach stability and prosperity. We are at the beginning of a process and not at its end. A revolution is always a turning point in a country's history, a process that sometimes takes decades to achieve some or all of its goals. Changing society and state is the most difficult and complex thing in the world. It's a long war with multiple battles. From this point of view, we can say that the Arab revolutions lost the first battle but have not lost the war. Let me add a few remarks about the attitude of the major Western government toward the Arab world. During the last 50 years, their policy has been to provide unconditional support to the regime in place, regardless of their human rights records. For them, a stable regime, fighting terrorism, protecting the southern borders of Europe from illegal immigration, and opening markets to Western influence, regardless of the social costs, is the ideal regime, and it does not matter if it is a corrupt dictatorship. Western governments were unable to foresee the wave of Arab uprising despite the data collected by intelligence services and famous research centers. They did not realize that our dictatorships offered only a mirror of stability, that they actually fed terrorism and prepared the waves of clandestine immigration that are now sweeping across the West. When the revolution broke out in the name of freedom and dignity, most Western leaders were unable to celebrate the triumph of democracy. They only feared the victory of Islamism. The fact that the first free election gave power to the moderate Islamists in Egypt or in Tunisia is most likely the explanation of this chilly reception. So it is striking for me to see that the same mistakes are committed, Western government reverting to the strategy of privileging stability over democracy. The best example being of this old new policy is the support by the French or the US government to the Egyptian dictator Sisi. So I am afraid that the Western politician did not draw any lessons from the Arab Spring, that they are returning to the pre-2000 policy, and that this will lead to more violent explosion in the near future. For me and for all Arab Democrats, it's obvious that the only way for Western government to defend their strategic and long-term interests is to stop supporting a regime condemned by their own people, push their authoritarian allies to do real reform, supporting sustainable development. Let me now turn to my own country, Tunisia, whose achievements have been so widely praised. How many times was I asked to explain the so-called democratic miracle in Tunisia? Yes, it is true that our revolution caused only 308 deaths and is not comparable to the civil war that is still raging in Syria with 500,000 killed and 7 million displaced. Yes, it's true that our situation is much better than in Libya and Yemen. Yes, it is true that while the coup has stopped the democratic transition in Egypt in 2013, the process in Tunisia of political is led to the fragile democracy we enjoy now. But this outcome has nothing to do with any superiority or quality that Tunisians might have. They are neither smarter or more peaceful or more tolerant than other Arabs or any human beings. The explanation is to look for in the structure of our society. The population of Tunisia is much more homogeneous than that of the neighboring countries. It's made of 90% of Arab, Muslim, Sunni. We have a tiny Jewish and Berber community, but those communities live in good harmony with the rest of the population. The middle class represents a large proportion of our society, and this is a very important also characteristic. Our military is professional, has no history of encroachment in economic activities or in politics. Our civil society is very strong, vigilant and yet responsible, inflexible and yet peaceful. Most importantly, secular and Islamist opponents to the dictatorship have learned to work past their disagreement and join forces, at least since the late 1990s. So it's easy to understand that reaching a political consensus is much less likely in countries with an extremely diverse population like Syria, or in countries with a military institution deeply involved in politics and economy, and I would say in corruption, like in Egypt, or in society without strong civil society like in Yemen or Libya. Whatever the causes, were structural, characteristic, or luck, we can be proud of what we have achieved in Tunisia. We have proved to them ourselves, before proving this to others, that that Islam and democracy are compatible. We learned that secularists and Islamists can work together, and that a genuine national dialogue can avoid violence. Tunisians do not live anymore in fear of the secret police. They feel free and safe from the arbitrariness they suffered from for decades. Tunisians enjoy freedom of speech, of association, and free elections. We have a new constitution, one of the best in the Arab world, not only because its content, but also because of its writing process. Hundreds of meetings, including in the most remote regions of the country, hearing and debates of rare intellectual quality, lengthy negotiations, sometimes surrealist, about just a single word, have made the Constitution a collective work. We are also proud to have set up the Truth and Dignity Commission, which is tasked with investigating crime and civil rights abuse of the past 60 years. The Commission is achieving an extraordinary work to provide Tunisians with a genuine opportunity to reappropriate their history and hopefully to prevent the return of the dictatorship. For many international observers, Tunisia is a success story because of all these achievements. Tunisia appears a very special case compared to the other countries of the Arab Spring. This is true. But it is also important to acknowledge the important challenges that remain ahead of us. Our democracy is still very fragile. The level of corruption is even higher than before the revolution. In the media, in politics, parties, and in the deep state, corruption, in fact, has been generalized. I do believe that our main shortcoming during the transitional period between 2011 and 2014 is that we didn't tackle the problem of corruption with tough measures. We were too exclusively focused on the constitution building process and on addressing the terrorist attacks and the rise of unemployment. We thought that we would have time, that after the end of the transitional period, we would have time to deal with the problem. In fact, corruption, mainly in the media sector, helped the restoration of the former system. The question now is the following: how to resume the process blocked or threatened by the restoration of the ancien regime? Under the authoritarian era, the rule of law was an interesting problem for me as an intellectual and a dream as a human rights activist. As many other Tunisians, I experienced the rule of arbitrariness, being harassed during more than 2 decades by the secret police, arrested many times, jailed in solitary confinement, sacked from my university, and forced to exile. But when elected, I made the enforcement of law my main objective, even my main obsession. But how do you implement the rule of law when you have inherited from the former regime a judiciary, a police, a bureaucracy that have to be totally reviewed and reformed? What's your margin of maneuver when so many political parties and media outlets are deeply connected to suspicious financial sources and to corruption? You see how difficult the task is. We have to promote by all political means the independence of the judiciary. We need to pass strict laws to control the funding of political parties and the media. We need to empower our citizens by promoting decentralization and further supporting the civil society. To ensure the future of our fragile democracy, we must involve what I call the E-generation in the process of keeping alive our project to become a country living under the rule of law. But the most important challenge is to build a solid and equitable economy free of corruption, otherwise no democracy can be sustainable. The rule of law is not a question of legislation, but a question of education and changing attitude and behavior, and this takes time. The most important thing I have learned is how complex and difficult it is to build a democracy on the ruins of dictatorship. History has taught us that the future is not made of what we fear most or hope most, but what surprises us the most. So let's hope that the good surprises will be as numerous as the bad ones, even when we know that the contrary is probably more likely. This is why I keep repeating to myself, it might be naive, too naive to try to change the world, but it is criminal not to try. So let's keep trying, because do we have even other choices than to keep trying? Thank you very much for your attention.
So I believe we have about a half hour for questions, and we have 4 microphones, one there, one up there, and I think one up there. So queue up at the microphones so that we can get you your questions for the president. Let me abuse my position and ask you the first question. So Tunisia is a very important country, but it's about 11 million people. It's somewhat smaller than the capital city of Egypt in terms of its population. And consequently, the challenges in Tunisia may be a little bit more manageable than the challenges elsewhere. So what you've talked about building a democracy in a country like Tunisia, the need to confront corruption, to hold members of the old regime accountable, to have truth and reconciliation, etc., that is very important and valid for the Tunisian experience. But what do you say to people in Syria or in Libya or even in Egypt, where they say, look, for us the issue is not democracy, getting democracy. The issue for us is maintaining some semblance or building some semblance of state authority so that we can avoid the kind of Hobbesian war of all against all. What solution does Moncef or Marzouki have for these countries where there is not even agreement over the state and over the need for order, where there is civil war? What proposals do you have for those places?
Well, before having proposal, everybody has to understand that if we have this mess in Syria, in Libya, it's once again the fault of the dictatorship. For more than 60 years in Syria, they tried the authoritarian regime with its stability and so forth, and it didn't work because people were extremely oppressed. In fact, it was not a true stability. It was more oppression than stability, and this is why you have this revolution. So reverting to the old regime would lead to the same conclusion 10 years or 20 years ahead. So the only problem now is to accept that we cannot build a new state on the basis of the old technique. So Syrian, Libyans, and Egyptians also, they have to sit together and they have to talk. How can we really build a new and stable country? Because we do know that we cannot really build a new stable country under the dictatorship, that this stability is not stability, it's a false stability. This is the main important lesson that we have, we must draw from the Arab Spring. I don't have a solution, and Tunisia is not a model, as I told you. We are not a model. I always say to my friends in Sudan, everywhere where I go, that we don't have recipe. Yeah. You have to invent your own recipe, but you have to understand that the corrupt elite, your elite, they have to understand that they cannot revert to the past. They have to, to bargain. They have to, to accept that, to share power, for instance, to improve the record of political freedom and so forth. Otherwise, we will have a new era of dictatorship, and then in 10 years, or 20 years, once again, we will have a new outburst.
Okay, so thank you for that answer. And now we'll turn it to even more intelligent Harvard students who will ask even better questions. So let me start here. Introduce yourself Keep your questions brief and ensure that they end in a question mark. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for your testimony. My name is Zuhair. I'm a Moroccan student here at the Kennedy School. One thing that distinguishes Tunisia, other than being the only democracy in the Middle East, is a strong secular tradition. You have a civil society that's vigilant. Women's rights movements are strong and very active in the political scene. So my question is simple. And although Tunisia is demographically different than the rest of the Middle East, what does it take for a predominantly Muslim and Arab society to reach a level of awareness that empowers it to seek separation of religion and state?
So his question is about Tunisia's secular culture, and his argument is that maybe Tunisia's long history of secularism helped it to actually achieve the democracy that it now tentatively enjoys. And he's asking, what needs to happen in the rest of the Arab world? How are you going to achieve the same kind of secular culture in the rest of the Arab world?
Well, you told you come from Morocco. I would like to just make an important remark that the only country probably who got the message of the Arab Spring was Morocco, because in 2011, the only Arab country, who makes some political reform, important political reform, is Morocco, And this is why they have now, just like in Tunisia in 2011, a government where Islamists are the majority. You say Tunisia has a strong secular tradition. True, but Tunisia has also a strong Islamist tradition. Don't forget that we have the mosque, the Zaytuna, and the Zaytuna mosque played an important role during the whole history of Tunisia in implementing Islamist values and so forth. And let me once again repeat that the real divide in the Arab world is not and must not be between Islamists and secularists. This is completely wrong. The real divide in our country is between people who are for democracy, for human rights, and people who are against democracy and the human right. And I can assure you, because I come from the secularist camp, I was for more than 20 years one of the leaders of the secularist movement. I can assure you that many of the secularists sided with the dictatorship, So for me, by my own experience, I'm not interested, you are Islamist or you're secularist. My main question is, are you are you for promoting human rights, democracy or not? I'm not interested in your ideology. This is the main specificity in Tunisia. This is why we succeeded, because we put the red line between Democrats and non-Democrats. And if they succeed in the same in Egypt to do so, I can assure you that a lot of problem would be solved.
Okay, thank you for that answer. We'll go here.
Thank you very much for being here. My name is Nibras Jmal. I'm a Tunisian undergraduate student at the college, and I pride myself on having voted for you back in 2014. This also makes me have a plethora of questions upon previous actions and future actions that you might undertake, but I'll try to limit them to these three. First of all...
You get one question. Ask the best one.
Okay. So if I were to ask one question, then would you think that your actions after the 2014 elections, especially the fact that you founded Harakat al-Irada, which is the Tunisian will movement, fractured the social democratic front in Tunisia, and will face a lot of problems when it comes to the municipal and the constitutional elections of 2019? And do you have a plan of uniting this front that some accuse you of having fractured after leaving the president office?
Do I have a plan? Of course I have a plan. I'm still active in politics. I think that why I'm still active in politics, because when I left the Palace of Carthage, I thought probably the new government would tackle the social and economic problem, and lets me keep quiet for 1 year just to watch the situation, and and I will make my decision after this period. This is exactly what I did. I stayed out of action for more than 1 year, And then when I saw that, the idea of revolution was betrayed, and that when I saw that the level of corruption raising, etc., I decided to come back, because I would like really to achieve my dream and to see Tunisia being a real democracy free of corruption. And this is why I'm still active in politics. Well, you say fracturing I don't know why, and why do you say that I'm fracturing? I'm fracturing anything. I am doing just my job. And we are trying, to have a front of, people having the same ideas. You talk probably about Muhammad Abu and etc. Be sure
And
that we are
also
trying everything to work together, because we have in front of us the former regime, and the former regime is extremely powerful. So I do know that but now this is Tunisian politics. Let's talk about this when we are in Tunisia. Please forget about that.
Okay, so you are a politician after all. Okay, so we'll go.
Politician in Tunisia, but here I am not politician.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm Jack and a sophomore at the college. My question is, what do you think is the role for Christians in Middle East revolutions and liberation movements when they're often protected by the authoritarian regimes and feel threatened by some of the rebel forces?
Well, you probably talk about the repression of Christians in Iraq or in Syria. Of course, I am, as a human rights activist, this is it's totally unacceptable, because once again, I have to repeat myself all the time. The problem is, are you with democracy or against democracy? Are you with human rights or against human rights? I'm not interested in knowing if you are Christian or Islamist or anything. But I do believe that the oppression that the Christians are submitted to is totally unacceptable, and the Christians are part of our world. Few people know that 10% of Arabs are Christian. They are part of our heritage, our culture for thousands of years, and we are very proud of this Christian community. We don't have Christian in the Maghreb area, but in the West, in the Mashriq, in Egypt, elsewhere, they are part of our population, and they suffer from what we're suffering from. For me, talking about Sunni, Shia, Christian, etc., is really backward way of thinking, primitive way of thinking. I reject it totally.
Okay, thank you for your question. Let me just say, I'm noticing the average age of the questioners is now creeping up, and I would like students to ask questions. So please, there's a microphone here. I would like to see some students queuing up at it. Yes, sir.
Listen, it can probably be argued that the first actually democratically legitimated government in the Arab world was Hamas in the 2006 Palestinian elections. Dr. Marzouki, you set a very good example a couple of years ago, another kind of example, when you joined Freedom Flotilla 3 on the Mary Ann. You got arrested and deported by Israel. What do you think should be done now? The conditions have continued to deteriorate in Gaza. What should be done for Gaza and about the occupation in general? The Arab Spring can never really be complete until Palestine is free, can it?
Thank you for your question.
Well, about Gaza, you probably know that, in fact, yes, I have been arrested by the Israelis and then sent back home. And I must say that I have been treated respectfully by the Israelis when I was arrested in the middle of the sea. But for me, it's not acceptable. We have in Gaza, you have 2 million people, jailed without any doing any crime, and it's not acceptable. I would say that the main responsible of what's happening in Gaza are not Israelis, but I'm sorry to say it's the Egyptian regime, because if the Egyptian regime were not also participating to this blockade, the situation would have been probably much more. About the problems of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, of course, we would like to see the end of this nightmare for both people, but frankly, I don't see the end of this. But I'm afraid that things are going to worsen, and probably we're going to have a situation like in South Africa, with the country living under some sort of apartheid. And I don't foresee that the solution of two states is going to arrange anything. Let's hope that in Israel or in Palestine they would have people like Nelson Mandela and de Klerk. This would be great, but let's hope and let's imagine and let's dream. I don't know.
Mr. President, apropos of that question, so I've read about the flotilla and your arrest, et cetera, and one of the things that I read was that when you were held in Israel, there were some attempts by Israelis to meet with you and you wouldn't meet with anybody. Is that an accurate description? And even if it's not, do you think, given your role as somebody who has bridged divides between people on different sides of deep ideological cleavages, that you might also bring this to the Israeli-Palestinian situation and help bridge divides and have dialogue in that conflict?
I can assure you that nobody asked to meet with me when I was arrested. I was just arrested a few hours and then sent to the airport. So it's not true that anybody tried to have any kind of discussion with me.
Okay, great. So let's go here. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for being here, sir. My name is Aaron Bostlin, and I'm studying education policy over at the Ed School. And I want to go to something you said about the habits of democracy and legislation not being a matter of legislation, but of education. And I want to mention for context that I spent some time living in a small country in the Himalayas called Bhutan that had transitioned to democracy a few years earlier. So I'm curious, both sort of in terms of thinking about the landscape you've described and how you sort of educate a citizenry for democracy, as well as, unfortunately, any lessons we might want to hear as Americans right now living in our own country about how do you impart the values of democracy through education as you outlined.
I would surprise you to say that the transition to democracy, in fact, began much probably in the 60s or the 70s in Tunisia, because don't forget that Tunisia is very close to Europe, so we are very close to the Western values, and so the education to democracy began far before the revolution. But now our main problem is, let me be frank with you. My main problem now is, the democratic values, etc., are all very well known. But the problem is, who would build the democracy in Tunisia? The new generation, okay? What I call the E-generation. The problem of this generation, it seems that sometimes I said, well, I spent all my life fighting for freedom of association, freedom of expression, election, etc. But the younger generation seems not to be interested at all in this, in this outcome. So if the new generation is not interested in promoting democracy, how could democracy be sustainable in Tunisia, even if the older generation, like my generation, is educated? This is really the most important challenge. Oh, we have 2 million or more than 2 million, young people, connected to the internet. But it seems that their world is the world of internet. They are not interested in politics at all. Only 6% of our young would vote. So the education would be to educate our youth, to educate it, not to the values of democracy, but to be simply interested in democracy and to understand that if they don't go to elect the new government or the new president, the older generation would decide for them. And this would be extremely harmful to their future.
Okay, we'll come here to my former student, Molly, is it? Yeah, okay.
Hi, I'm Molly. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. My question is about the neighboring countries which are now in turmoil, Libya, and Syria, and Yemen. What would your advice be to policymakers in the West in engaging in conflicts in these countries to help promote peace?
What would your advice be to Western governments to help promote peace in countries like Libya, Syria, the countries
I'm not going to give any advice because they will not be heard, We repeat these advices for more than 30 years. Stop supporting dictatorship. It's not in your own interest. But Western politicians, you know, this is the problem of the democratic system itself, you know. Western politicians, they are elected for, let's say, 1 or 2 terms of 4 years, 8 years. So they are interested, they are interested in the short-term results. So they want results. And if they believe that, you know, in their own time, they will have this stability, the future, it's not their business. So they are not interested in what's going on, the results, the long-term results of their decisions. This is probably why, of course, the Western politicians, they know that it's probably going to, you know, to burst once, but it seems that it's not their business. It seems that they want, you know, short-term results. And they are not interested in what would happen in Tunisia in the next year or in Syria. But you will have, you know, to tackle the problems due to the short-term decision made by your president or by your administration. So it's up to you, to put the pressure. It's not up to me to give advices that I never heard.
But what's your advice to her?
My advice to you is, of course, to be sure that you know, promoting human rights, promoting democracy, social development in the Arab country would be probably your own in your own interests. But you know, now we are living in a very interconnected world. I have read the paper on the New York Times 2 years ago by Thomas Friedman, you know, dividing the world in the world of order and the world of disorder, and saying the world of disorder, of course, is the Arab world, Africa, and so forth, and saying that, look, the world of order, United States, Europe, etc., should put the pressure on or the pressure so to get this, in fact, to defend itself from the world of disorder. And the problem is, you know, we live in an interconnected world, so that you cannot divide the world in world of disorder and world of order. If you have, you know, a certain amount of disorder in one part of the system, you will have disorder everywhere. You will have disorder all over the system. So you cannot protect yourself from the world of disorder just by building wall, like your president would like to do between Mexico and the United States. It's completely, for me, it is a nonsense. You know, just because our world is extremely interconnected world. So if you want to live here in peace in this country, you have to think that probably you have to make the world safer and the world better. And it's up your generation, you know, you will have to do this job, and I wish you good luck, because it's a huge task. Good question.
Yes, sir, you over here.
Hi, my name is Jeff Rousset. I'm a teaching fellow here at the Kennedy School. Given the role of Western nations and the United States in supporting authoritarian regimes, as you've mentioned, my question is, when you were in power, did you ever feel pressure from the United States to make decisions that you felt were against the interests of the Tunisian people? And if so, how did you respond to that pressure?
No, we didn't have any pressure, because, but we didn't have also any help. I remember that, you know, we were faced with the terrorist attacks, and we expected that we would have some military help from the United States. We didn't get any help, and we thought naively, we were naive to think that probably Tunisia would be a good example for successful democratization in the Arab world. And we always told our friends in the West that we badly need economic support, because democracy without economic growth wouldn't be sustainable. And we didn't get anything. And this is probably one of the most curious things that I have experienced in my life, in political life. This is why I do not trust. Let me be frank with you. I am extremely grateful to the Western civil society. I mean, organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights here in the United States, many civil rights organizations, etc. We have a very good, we have had, and we still have very good relationship with the civil society. But as far as the government are concerned, I can assure you that we really think that we are facing hypocritical policy and probably a counterproductive policy. But it's up to you, as I say, to put the pressure on your government so to tackle the problem, not only for the benefits or, you know, short-term benefits, but also long-term effects.
Great, so I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, if the questions are concise and actually questions. So what about you, sir?
Good evening, sir. My name is Justin, and my question is, with Tunisia being a young democracy, there's many potential contributing factors to future instability in both the near and long term, like violent extremist organizations, terrorist attacks, large number of foreign fighters returning from Iraq, Syria, back to Tunisia, Morocco, Libya. What do you see as some of the biggest threat to stability in Tunisia and democracy there in the future?
Well, you are talking about one of the most important challenges we are dealing with, the terrorist threat. Let me first answer about the Tunisians who were leaving to Tunisia to go to Syria or Iraq, etc. Please don't forget that they are a tiny minority, first of all. Second, remember that all those young people, you know, were born and educated under the dictatorship. So it's not our fault, it's the dictatorship. And they are the dictatorship byproduct. Now about how to tackle the problem. It's so easy, you know, to believe that terrorist threat is a matter of, you know, security forces on the military strategy, etc. But the problem is much more complex. You have to deal with the roots of the problem, and the roots of the problem, of course, are the poverty, corruption, humiliation, and so forth. So you have to transform your own society. You know, terrorism in society is a symptom of a disease, of social disease, and you cannot treat here I would talk as a physician. You cannot treat disease just by treating the symptom. You have to treat the very root of the disease, and this takes time. So we have to live with this threat. If we begin, you know, good strategy now, today, we will probably get rid of this problem in 2 decades or 3 decades. Because once again, the main problem of terrorists is not that. Let me tell you something. Islam has nothing to do with Islam, and terrorism has nothing to do with Islamism. Terrorism is the protest of part of the youth against a social and economic position they cannot tolerate. So if you want to solve the problem, of course you have the response, the short-term responses by the military or by the police. But if you do not address the social and economic roots of the problem, you will have always the disease.
So this here will be our last question.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Farhan, and I'm actually a third-year student at the college. I'm an undergraduate. My question is that, given the new Tunisian regime increasing ties with authoritarian countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, in your opinion, is that a threat to the democratic and human rights work that has been done in Tunisia since the revolution? And in your opinion, what sort of countries should Tunisia be increasing ties with to sustain the ideals of the revolution or of the Arab Spring?
Well, as I said in my lecture, Tunisia and the other Arab countries where the revolution seems to have failed, it's not only for an internal reason, but also for external reason. And you talk about some Arab countries, we were extremely afraid of the Arab Spring. They played an important role, you know, to abort this revolution. A lot of money has been put even in Tunisia, you know, to buy medias, politicians, and so forth. The problem is we didn't have enough support from Western government. as a new and fragile democracy, we have hope that probably we would have some support from Western government, but as I told you, we didn't have the support. So now, if you want to build our democracy, we have to rely on ourselves and only on ourselves, probably on the Western civil society where we have allies, but I think we have to rely on ourselves. We have to forget about any kind of, especially now with the rise of populism, with the new administration in the United States, we forget about any kind of support. But we have to accept that for the next 4 years or probably 8 years, we will have to deal with dictatorships once again supported by the Western government. It's sad to say, but this is the reality. This is the truth.
Well, on that very sobering note, let me ask you all.
No. Let me finish by saying something. We are going to overcome. We're going to overcome. We will build this democracy, this solid democracy in Tunisia, and we will give the good example. And be sure that the Arab world is probably now, is in a very chaotic period of destruction. But after destruction, we will construct our countries, and we will be part of the history and not only be the victims of this history. We will be actors of history and not only victims. Thank you.
لا حضرتك اسمع حضرتك